The ice-cold water hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my 80-year-old lungs. One second I was in my armchair, safe in my own living room, the next sheer terror. My neighbor, Carol, with her razor-sharp platinum bob and those ever-present oversized sunglasses glinting with malice, was framed in my open window, deliberately, aggressively, blasting me with a garden hose. I cried out, clutching my chest as the frigid spray soaked me to the bone, my heart hammering against my ribs. And why this sudden, vicious assault? Because my new sunshine yellow living room curtains, my small joy, were, in her utterly insane declaration, too bright. Can you fathom such unhinged entitlement dictating what color curtains you can have in your own home? Little did that woman know, her reign of petty tyranny, her obsession with controlling everyone to match her warped standards, wasn't just about to end, it was about to spectacularly implode, exposing her as the true neighborhood blight, all thanks to the very visibility she so despised in my cheerful decor. Oh, the irony was going to be delicious. My name is Eleanor, and for the better part of 2 decades since my beloved Arthur passed on, this little house on Willow Creek Lane has been my sanctuary. It's a pleasant, usually tranquil cul-de-sac. The kind of place where folks still believe in a friendly wave over the fence and the occasional shared pot of coffee. At 80 years young, as I like to tell my grandson David, my days are measured by simple pleasures. I find profound joy in the independence my little home affords me, in the familiar comfort of my routines. My mornings are often spent coaxing my roses to bloom. Arthur always said I had a green thumb, but I think it's more stubborn affection than magic. The afternoons are for my books, a warm cup of tea, and looking out at the little world I've built. This house isn't just bricks and mortar, it's a repository of memories, each trinket, each photograph holding a piece of my heart. I've always believed a home should reflect the sunshine within, which is why, just a few weeks before Carol decided my taste was a personal affront to her existence, I'd treated myself. New curtains for the living room. They weren't extravagant, just a lovely, cheerful sunshine yellow, with a delicate little floral embroidery that reminded me of the wildflowers Arthur and I used to pick. They transformed the room, bathing it in a warm, golden glow when the afternoon sun streamed through. It was a small change, a simple splash of color, but it lifted my spirits immeasurably. Old Mr. Henderson from across the way, who's lived here even longer than I have, tipped his hat and said they made the whole street look a bit brighter. Young Mrs. Gable, my direct neighbor, a sweet but rather timid woman, even commented on how they suited my sunny disposition. I never dreamed, not in a million years, that a pair of curtains could ignite such a bizarre and hateful campaign against me, or that they would ultimately lead to unmasking the ugliest personality on Willow Creek Lane. Carol Perkins descended upon our quiet cul-de-sac about 6 months prior to the Great Curtain War, as David later jokingly called it. She bought the Miller house, diagonally opposite mine, and immediately began what seemed like a mission to impose her will upon its very structure, much like she'd later try with its inhabitants. She was, I'd guess, in her late 40s or early 50s, though she carried herself with an air of someone much more established in their own importance. The hair was the first thing you'd notice, that stark, asymmetrical platinum blonde bob, so sharp it looked like it could cut glass, or at least the spirits of unsuspecting neighbors. Then came the oversized sunglasses, practically a permanent fixture on her head, like a queen surveying her less-than-perfect subjects. And the activewear. Oh, the endless parade of expensive, coordinated activewear, though the most athletic activity I ever witnessed was her imperious strut from her gas-guzzling SUV to her front door, a monstrously large, branded handbag swinging like a pendulum of judgment, phone invariably glued to her ear. My first, shall we say, personal encounter with Carol's unique brand of charm occurred a few weeks after her arrival. I was out front, engaged in my seasonal battle with the aphids on my Queen Elizabeth roses, a task requiring patience and a gentle touch. She sauntered by, a vision in lycra, her perfectly manicured nails, the kind that seemed perpetually poised to point out a flaw, catching the sunlight. She paused, her gaze sweeping over my carefully tended blooms with an expression that could only be described as faintly disgusted. "That's quite an explosion of color," she commented, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "A little overwhelming for the general aesthetic of the neighborhood, don't you think?" The way she said general aesthetic implied it was a sacred doctrine and she, its high priestess. I confess, I was taken aback. "Oh, I've always found joy in a vibrant garden," I managed, offering a polite smile. "They're old friends, these roses." She emitted a small, almost imperceptible sniff, a sound laden with unspoken criticism, and continued her regal procession. A tiny seed of unease planted itself in my mind. This woman wasn't just a new neighbor, she was an arbiter of taste, apparently. The true opening salvo, however, came a week after my sunshine yellow curtains made their debut. Tucked brazenly into my mailbox. No envelope, mind you, just a piece of offensively expensive-looking, heavy cream cardstock, folded with knife-like precision, was a note. The handwriting was as sharp and angular as her features. It read, "The recent additions to your window decor are exceptionally garish and, frankly, quite disruptive to the visual harmony and property values of our community. A more muted palette, perhaps a tasteful beige or a non-committal gray, would be significantly more appropriate and appreciated by those of us who value subtlety." It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. Garish? Disruptive? They were yellow. Just cheerful, ordinary yellow. But to Carol, they were clearly a declaration of war. I remember sinking into my armchair, the very one by those offensive curtains, and feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I truly did, to dismiss the note as the ramblings of a particularly persnickety newcomer. Perhaps she was just having a bad day, or a bad month. But Carol, it turned out, was not a woman who let things go, especially not things she'd decreed inappropriate. Her campaign began subtly, insidiously. A few days after the note, I was tending my front garden when I heard her voice, carrying clearly from the community mailboxes where she was holding court with Mrs. Gable and another neighbor I didn't know well. Utterly blinding, no sense of decency, some people just have no respect for neighborhood standards, frankly, it's an eyesore. My cheeks flushed with a heat that was part embarrassment, part simmering anger. Mrs. Gable, to her credit, looked uncomfortable, but she stayed silent, a small betrayal that stung more than I expected. Then came the direct complaints, routed through poor Mr. Abernathy, the long-suffering volunteer coordinator of our rather informal neighborhood watch. Suddenly, my ancient, beloved bird feeders, which had provided sustenance and song for generations of sparrows and finches, were attracting an aggressive and unsanitary flock of pigeons, according to an email Abernathy apologetically forwarded. He even mentioned Carol had called them rats with wings. Next, it was my set of gentle bamboo wind chimes, a memento from a trip Arthur and I took to Kyoto. Their soft, meditative clinking was now, apparently, a constant and irritating source of noise pollution, particularly during napping hours. Whose napping hours, I wondered? Carol's, presumably. Each petty grievance, each thinly veiled accusation, chipped away at my sense of peace, making me feel like an unwelcome eccentric in my own long-standing community. I decided I had to try and reason with her, woman to woman. That was my mistake. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. 80 years on this earth have taught me the value of choosing one's battles. But this felt personal, an attack on my very right to enjoy my home. So, armed with a peace offering of freshly baked lemon poppy seed muffins, I ventured across to her pristine, architecturally correct domain. She answered the door looking as if she'd just stepped off a fashion shoot for Entitled Activewear Monthly, sunglasses already perched on her head despite it being an overcast afternoon. Her lips thinned when she saw me and my offering. "Carol," I began, my voice betraying a slight tremor I couldn't control. "I was hoping we could have a little chat about the curtains and perhaps find some common ground." She didn't invite me in. She simply leaned against the door jamb, arms crossed, a perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched above the rim of her sunglasses. "Common ground, Eleanor? Your curtains are visual terrorism. And frankly, your quaint little affectations are becoming a serious detriment to this neighborhood's reputation." "Affectations," I echoed, the muffins suddenly feeling very heavy in my hands. "My bird feeders? My wind chimes? These are things that bring me simple happiness." "Happiness shouldn't come at the expense of community standards and aesthetic cohesion," she retorted, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a premium neighborhood. Or it was, before certain elements became overly conspicuous. Perhaps you should consider the impact your choices have on property values." "Beige, Eleanor. Think beige. It's a universally inoffensive color." The conversation, if one could call her lecture that, deteriorated from there. I left her doorstep feeling utterly deflated, the muffins uneaten, my anxiety escalating. The subtle harassment intensified. My morning newspaper, usually left neatly on my porch, would be found mysteriously damp, sometimes even under a shrub. Her lawn sprinklers developed an uncanny accuracy for soaking the exact patch of my walkway I used most, turning it into a treacherous slip hazard. My meticulously sorted recycling bins would be knocked over on collection day, their contents spilling onto the driveway. It was a relentless war of attrition, designed to wear me down. And it was working. My sleep grew fitful, punctuated by imagined noises. I found myself jumpy, constantly peering out from behind my offensive curtains, wondering what fresh torment Carol was devising. I even spoke to Mr. Abernathy, hoping for some intervention, but he just sighed and said, "Carol's very particular, Eleanor. And there are no actual rules about curtain color." I felt utterly alone. Then came that dreadful Tuesday afternoon. The air was warm, a gentle breeze whispering through the slight opening in my living room window. I was in my armchair, lost in a novel, the yellow curtains casting a soft, golden light. Suddenly, a furious shout from outside shattered the quiet. "Those hideous curtains. I've warned you. I've had enough." Before I could even register the words, a violent torrent of cold water erupted through the window. It struck me full on my arm and chest, drenching me instantly, the shock of it making me gasp and clutch at my heart. The water kept coming, a relentless, angry stream, spraying indiscriminately across my living room. My book went flying, pages soaked. The armchair was saturated. Water cascaded onto my precious antique walnut side table, where a cherished photograph of Arthur and me stood. Scrambling to my feet, my old bones protesting, heart pounding like a trapped bird, I rushed to the window, already dripping and shivering. And there she was, Carol, resplendent in a blinding white tennis outfit, platinum hair gleaming, sunglasses reflecting the gray sky, a garden hose gripped in her hands like a weapon. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage as she directed the powerful jet of water into my home. "They're too bright," she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "They're an assault on the senses. You're visually polluting the entire street. You leave me no choice but to take action." Tears of fear, of disbelief, of utter outrage streamed down my face, mingling with the cold hose water. "Carol, stop it. Please. You're flooding my house. You're scaring me," I pleaded, my voice a pathetic quaver. She gave one final, contemptuous blast of water that hit a lampshade, sending it askew, then abruptly twisted the nozzle off. She dropped the hose onto her immaculate lawn as if it were contaminated, gave her perfect hair a little pat, and stalked back into her house with an air of profound, righteous satisfaction. Not another word. Not a flicker of remorse. I just stood there, soaked to the skin, trembling uncontrollably, staring at the devastation in my living room. My beautiful yellow curtains, my symbol of cheer, hung like drowned flags, streaked with dirt from the hose. Water was pooling on the polished wood floor, seeping into the rug. My sanctuary, my safe haven, had been brutally violated. All because of a color. All because of one woman's monstrous, unyielding entitlement. In that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about curtains anymore. This was about decency, about respect, about reclaiming my life from a bully. And I, Eleanor, an 80-year-old widow, was no longer going to just endure it. The immediate aftermath of Carol's aquatic assault was a blur of shivering, mopping, and a deep, pervasive sense of violation. The antique walnut table, Arthur's anniversary gift, now bore an ugly, spreading water stain, a permanent scar. My cheerful curtains were a sodden, dismal mess. But worse than the physical damage was the chilling realization of Carol's capacity for malice. That evening, my voice still shaky, I called David. He arrived the next morning, his usually easygoing expression replaced by a thunderous frown as he surveyed the damage. He's a good lad, David, a newly minted lawyer with a sharp mind and a fierce protective streak for his old grandmother. He listened, his jaw tightening, as I poured out the whole sorry saga. The notes, the sneers, the petty sabotage, culminating in the water hose attack. "Grandma," he said, his voice quiet but steely, "this isn't just being a bad neighbor. This is harassment, pure and simple. What she did yesterday, that's assault. That's property damage. We need undeniable proof of her pattern of behavior." His gaze drifted to Carol's house, a monument to sterile perfection. Her lawn was an unnaturally green carpet, her flower beds regimented like soldiers on parade. "She's obsessed with appearances, isn't she?" he mused, a thoughtful look on his face. People who construct such a perfect public facade often have the messiest secrets. They think their own perfection makes them invisible when they misbehave. And so, with my somewhat reluctant permission, I've never been one for spying, but Carol had pushed me far beyond my usual boundaries of propriety. David installed a very small, very discreet security camera. He positioned it cleverly beneath the eave of my porch, angled to cover my front window and yard, but also, crucially, a significant portion of Carol's front yard and the street area between our homes. "Motion activated, Grandma," he explained. "It'll record anything or anyone out of the ordinary. Let's just see what our pristine neighbor Carol gets up to when she believes no one is looking." For several days, the camera footage was unremarkable. Carol striding to and from her SUV, Carol receiving deliveries, Carol occasionally casting a venomous glare towards my house. I began to think that perhaps the hose incident, as terrifying as it was, had been the climax of her campaign. I was sorely mistaken. About a week later, David came over, a particular glint in his eye. He set up his laptop on my kitchen table. "Grandma," he said, trying to suppress a grin, "I think you'll find this illuminating." The first clip he showed me was time-stamped late the previous evening. There was Carol, emerging from her house with her fluffy white toy poodle, Mitzi. Mitzi proceeded to do her business, right in the middle of Mr. Henderson's meticulously cultivated bed of prize-winning crimson petunias. Carol, after a cursory glance around the darkened street, simply tugged Mitzi's leash and strolled back inside, leaving the mess for poor Mr. Henderson to discover. The same Mr. Henderson who had been vocally blaming local teenagers for weeks. "And it gets better," David said, his grin widening. The next series of clips from various nights was the real bombshell. Our neighborhood had recently been put under strict water usage restrictions due to a prolonged dry spell. Everyone was making an effort, letting lawns go a bit brown, using watering cans for precious plants. Carol, however, had apparently found a loophole. The footage clearly showed her, often dressed in dark, less conspicuous clothing than her usual vibrant activewear, sneaking out in the dead of night. She'd creeped to the communal garden tap at the end of the cul-de-sac, a tap intended for the small allotment gardens and strictly off-limits for general lawn watering under the new rules. There, under the cloak of darkness, she would attach a long, coiled hose and stealthily drag it all the way back to her own property, presumably to lavishly water her enormous, suspiciously verdant garden and lawn. She was, quite simply, stealing water from the community, while simultaneously being one of the loudest voices on the neighborhood email forum complaining about inconsiderate water wasters. David had even more footage of her deliberately kicking piles of autumn leaves from her immaculate sidewalk onto my freshly swept pathway, and one particularly vindictive clip of her, late one night, picking up small pebbles from her gravel path and flinging them at my bedroom window, creating that irritating, intermittent tapping sound that had been robbing me of sleep for weeks. I had thought it was just the wind in the old oak tree. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of it all was breathtaking. Carol Perkins, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics and moral rectitude, was a common thief, a vandal, and a malicious harasser. Her pristine facade concealed a truly rotten core, and her own obsession with keeping her misdeeds hidden was about to become the very tool of her public unmasking. We had her, well and truly. David, with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor, compiled the most damning video clips into a concise, irrefutable presentation. His first instinct was to go straight to the police, and a part of me, the part that still smarted from the cold shock of the hose water, agreed. But the thought of police cars, formal statements, and court appearances filled my 80-year-old heart with dread. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted my peace, my quiet life, back. "All right, Grandma," David said, his voice softening with understanding. "Let's try a more direct community intervention first. We'll give her one chance to face the truth among her peers. If she doesn't completely capitulate, then we escalate to official channels. Deal?" I nodded, a wave of nervous relief washing over me. His plan was simple yet brilliant, a small, informal neighborhood gathering at my house. He crafted a carefully worded email, inviting a select group of neighbors, Mr. Henderson, whose petunias had suffered, Mrs. Gable, who needed to see Carol's true colors, Mr. Abernathy, from the Neighborhood Watch and the Water Conservation Committee, and a couple of others who had either been swayed by Carol's earlier gossip against me or were simply respected voices in our little community. And, of course, the guest of honor, Carol herself. The invitation innocuously proposed a meeting to discuss recent neighborhood concerns and explore ways to foster greater harmony and understanding. On Willow Creek Lane, I baked a batch of my signature oatmeal raisin cookies, my hands trembling only slightly this time. I was ready. Carol arrived with her customary air of regal condescension, a few minutes late, naturally, as if to underscore her own importance. Sunglasses still perched atop the platinum helmet of hair, she surveyed my living room, the scene of her earlier crime, with a look that managed to be both disdainful and smug. She probably anticipated this gathering was her platform to further decry my offensive curtains and my general lack of neighborhood spirit. She even offered a tight, patronizing smile as she selected a chair, positioning herself as if to address a tribunal. David, bless his calm legal mind, began the proceedings with disarming pleasantness. He thanked everyone for taking the time to come. "As you know," he started, his gaze sweeping the room before settling briefly on me with a reassuring glance, "we've had a few, shall we say, discordant notes in our usually harmonious neighborhood symphony lately. And my grandmother, Eleanor, has unfortunately been on the receiving end of some particularly troubling behavior." Carol let out an audible, theatrical scoff. "Troubling? Her curtains are a public menace, an affront to common decency. Someone had to take a stand for aesthetic standards." Yes, the curtains," David said, his tone smooth as silk. Grandma, perhaps you could share with our neighbors exactly what happened last Tuesday afternoon regarding those curtains? My voice was steadier now, fueled by a quiet indignation. I recounted the hose incident in detail, the shock, the cold, the fear that an 80-year-old woman felt being physically assaulted in her own home, the damage to my property, the sheer terror of Carol's rage-filled face in my window. I saw Mrs. Gable's hand fly to her mouth. Mr. Henderson's weathered face flushed with anger. Even Mr. Abernathy looked visibly disturbed. Carol, however, remained defiantly unrepentant. She was given ample warning, she snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. Those garish yellow things are an optical assault. They lower the entire tone of Willow Creek Lane. I was merely abating a persistent nuisance. Any reasonable person would agree. Abating a nuisance by deliberately spraying an elderly woman and flooding her home with a garden hose, Carol? David interjected, his voice still calm, but now laced with an unmistakable edge of cold steel. Is that your interpretation of reasonable and neighborly conduct? Carol's mouth opened, a torrent of self-justification clearly poised on her lips, but David held up a hand, forestalling her. Before you elaborate on your unique theories of neighborhood management, Carol, perhaps we should consider a few other examples of your contributions to our community. With that, he seamlessly connected his laptop to my modest television screen. The room fell silent. The first video played, Carol's pristine white poodle, Mitzi, defiantly soiling Mr. Henderson's vibrant crimson petunias, followed by Carol's nonchalant departure from the scene of the crime. Mr. Henderson let out a strangled gasp. That was you?" he exclaimed, turning to glare at Carol, his face a study in disbelief and dawning fury. "I've been blaming those poor Peterson boys for weeks."
Mitzi.
"Your Mitzi did that." Carol's carefully applied foundation couldn't quite hide the sudden rush of blood that drained from her face, leaving it a pasty white. That's an outrageous invasion of my privacy," she sputtered, her voice losing its assured sharpness. "You have no right." "No right, Carol?" David countered, his voice level. "Or is it simply a recording from a public vantage point, documenting a clear violation of local pet ordinances? The same ordinances you so frequently cite when complaining about others, I believe." He didn't give her a chance to recover. The next clip, even more damning, filled the screen. Carol, cloaked in darkness, her distinctive silhouette unmistakable even in the grainy night vision footage, connecting a hose to the community garden tap and surreptitiously dragging it towards her own water-guzzling property. The collective intake of breath in the room was palpable. Mr. Abernathy, a staunch advocate for water conservation and a stickler for rules, looked as if he might explode. His face turned a dangerous shade of puce. "Carol Perkins," he began, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, "we have all been under severe water restrictions. We have all been making sacrifices, letting our gardens suffer, for the good of the community. And you have been stealing water? Our water." Carol's smug composure had utterly disintegrated. She leaped to her feet, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "This is a setup. A conspiracy. Those videos are faked. Doctored. That's not me. I demand you stop this harassment." "Oh, it's you, Carol," David said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He paused the video, then zoomed in on a frame where a sliver of moonlight caught Carol's face, her sharp platinum bob clearly identifiable. He then, for good measure, played the short, irritating clip of her flinging pebbles at my bedroom window in the dead of night. The fight visibly drained out of her. The denials caught in her throat. She looked from one stony face to another, finding no sympathy, no support, only a reflection of her own ugliness in their shocked and disgusted expressions. Her carefully constructed world of superiority was shattering around her in real time. But the curtains," she stammered, a pathetic, desperate attempt to deflect, to revert to her original, ludicrous justification. "They were just so terribly bright. It was Mrs. Gable, timid Mrs. Gable, who delivered the final, quiet blow. "More offensive than theft, Carol?" she asked, her voice surprisingly firm. "More offensive than vandalism, and lying, and tormenting an elderly woman?" Carol stood there, speechless, her face a ruin of crumbling arrogance and dawning humiliation. The oversized sunglasses on her head seemed to mock her, a symbol of the blindness she'd shown to her own despicable behavior. She snatched her enormous designer handbag, her hands fumbling with the clasp, and without another word, without a shred of dignity left, she turned and practically bolted for my house. The slam of my front door echoed through the stunned silence she left behind. My little yellow curtains fluttered gently in the breeze from the still open door, seeming to breathe a sigh of relief along with the rest of us. In the days and weeks that followed Carol Perkins' dramatic unmasking, a profound quiet descended upon her once imperious household. She became a veritable recluse, rarely sighted beyond the confines of her now-tainted property. The official letters, however, found their mark. The first arrived from the local water authority, complete with a hefty fine for unauthorized water usage and a stern warning about future infractions. This was swiftly followed by a formal letter from Mr. Abernathy on behalf of the informal neighborhood committee, detailing the collective grievances regarding property damage, harassment, and the flagrant disregard for community bylaws, strongly suggesting she consider restitution for the damages. Mr. Henderson, emboldened, sent her a meticulously itemized bill for his decimated prize-winning petunias, along with a rather scathing letter about responsible pet ownership. The subtle, and not so subtle, shunning by the rest of Willow Creek Lane must have been the bitterest pill for a woman so obsessed with appearances and social standing. The whispers now followed her, not me, and they spoke of hypocrisy, theft, and downright meanness. The weight of her public disgrace and the constant, disapproving scrutiny evidently became too much for Carol's delicate sensibilities. Less than 2 months after that fateful neighborhood gathering, a for sale sign was hammered into her perfectly manicured but ill-gotten lawn. The sale was surprisingly swift. Perhaps the neighborhood itself was eager for a fresh start. I watched from my living room window, from behind my cheerful yellow curtains, as the moving truck rumbled away, carrying Carol and her toxic presence out of our lives for good. A profound sense of peace, the likes of which I hadn't felt in months, settled over me. Several of my neighbors, including a visibly contrite Mrs. Gable and a sheepish Mr. Abernathy, made a point of stopping by individually in the following days. They offered heartfelt apologies for not having listened more closely to my initial, quieter concerns about Carol, for allowing her forceful personality to cloud their judgment. Mrs. Gable even brought me a lovely potted orchid, confessing with a smile, "Your yellow curtains actually inspired me, Eleanor. I'm thinking of adding a splash of lavender to my kitchen." That simple gesture warmed my heart more than she could know. Life on Willow Creek Lane slowly returned to its familiar, comfortable rhythm. My sunshine yellow curtains, which I had professionally cleaned, thankfully, all the muddy water stains came out, continued to hang proudly, a bright testament to a quiet battle won. The antique walnut table still bears a faint watermark, a subtle reminder of the unpleasantness, but now, when I look at it, I don't feel anger or fear. I feel a sense of resilience. That whole dreadful ordeal was an immense strain, far more than any 80-year-old should have to endure over something as trivial as the color of her curtains. Yet it also brought unexpected lessons. It reminded me that even when you feel small, unheard, and vulnerable, there is immense strength to be found in truth, in quiet dignity, and yes, sometimes in a tech-savvy grandson with a well-placed security camera. Carol, in her arrogant quest to dictate everyone else's aesthetic, ironically ended up having her own deeply flawed character exposed for all to see. Her obsession with a pristine image became the very instrument of her downfall. And that, I must say, is a form of poetic justice even more satisfyingly vibrant than my beautiful, unapologetically bright, yellow curtains. My little corner of the world was peaceful once more, and that peace felt more precious than ever.